All right. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is JD Creedon. I'm a managing partner here at LEC and thrilled that you're all able to join us. We are getting better at our monthly webinars, and we are working through a number of kinks that we seem to have fixed. So here's our agenda for the day. One is just going over some simple housekeeping as it relates to the webinar. Two, introducing you to our esteemed guests, and then letting them do their thing on clean hydrogen. I think you're going to enjoy the presentation from our team, and then we're going to do. Terry's going to do some expert recognition, and then we'll close it out with some reminders, and we'll get it going from there. So with that, without further ado, yeah, here's our housekeeping has moved from 3 down to 1 item. So for this webinar, there are people who cannot use the Q&A tab for whatever reason. If you can't use the Q&A tab, please feel free to use the chat tab to log questions for our speakers. Myself, Elena, and Ryan will be correlating and pulling together those questions and presenting them as we go along once people are wrapped up with their presentations. And so please, if you have questions, make sure to get them to us. And for those not familiar, welcome to an LEC webinar. We are in our 30th year of business, which is very exciting. For those who don't know, we are made up of about 150 experts. It's probably actually north of that to be about 160. We average about 30 years of experience, but these are operators and folks that have worked with the technologies that they are consulting on today. So they have been there and done it. And 97% are advanced degrees, as you'll see from our speakers. Most are PhDs, but we do have a few MBAs like myself in the mix. So we are global now. We are doing projects all over the world. Our services span 5 or 6 areas of expertise, and we are always looking to add some new and exciting avenues of exploration if and when our customers are asking us for that help. We are currently doing bio-based materials and chemicals. We do biofuels, which is where we started. We are in biopharmaceuticals and biotechnologies. We do a lot of work in feedstocks, which has been a huge piece of our business over the years. And across those verticals, we are doing a lot of work in due diligence for private equity firms, banks, and others. We do engineering and project oversight. We do some strategy work, project development and operations. We also have a government group that's doing regulatory and special services. So we are helping customers who are looking for tax and other incentive programs. We help them to get their projects aligned. And then finally, we do have an expert witness business that has been flourishing for years that Ryan is running currently. And we're just excited you're here. And we would welcome any and all requests for further help. If you are in need of any expertise, we are here to help. So please reach out and let's see if we can help. With that, let's move to the next slide. Great. So today's speakers, let me start with Pete. So Pete is a project director with LEC. He is also the man responsible for pulling together our first center of excellence, the Low Carbon Hydrogen Center of Excellence. Pete has done a ton of work along with Terry and some others to make this center of excellence a reality. And today is a bit of a coming out party for them. And we are excited to introduce you to the team, hear a little bit about what they're doing. Pete has been in the business for quite a while, as you can see from his experience. He has an MBA, and he has an undergrad from my alma mater, Cornell. And I think Terry's too. So Pete will be kicking us off, followed by Terry, Dr. Terry Mazanec, who is one of our managing directors and has been an integral part of this Center of Excellence with Pete, hand in glove. And Terry can give you further background, but he has been a major source, one of our most senior MDs, and has helped LEC to grow tremendously. And we're thrilled to have him here. And Dr. Jeff Reed is also relatively new to LEC, but an esteemed member of the academic community. He was out at UCI, where we were able to work with him on a previous webinar. He has been working with Pete on the Center of Excellence and has been an active participant in this market and has an excellent perspective on where this market's going. So with that, let me turn it over to Pete and have him kick off the webinar, and we will go from there.
Great, thanks, JD, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. So what we're going to do today is kind of give a sense of where the clean hydrogen economy is, where it may be going over the next 5 to 10 years, comparison of different pathways there, and some of the potential and pitfalls as well. So we're trying to give you a holistic view, thumbnail sketch, I think, of the industry. I'm going to take a couple slides here just to talk about who we are as an organization within LEC. As JD said, we are branded as the Low Carbon Hydrogen Center of Excellence. So about a year ago, JD and I had a conversation about the emerging hydrogen economy and the needs of our clients, and several inquiries that we're getting to provide expertise on the hydrogen value chain. So we decided to bring together, tap into our network, and started with some folks in-house and reached out to the broader community, brought in experts like Jeff. So now we're 20 plus experts touching on various aspects of the hydrogen economy, including techno-economic analysis, regulatory analysis, evaluation of technology, so understanding what your what kind of electrolyzer you might want, those sort of things. As JD said, very experienced group, high percentage of advanced degrees, and we are global and cover North America, the EU, and Southeast Asia currently, and looking to expand that over the next year. So these are some of the areas we touch on. So we will talk today about blue hydrogen. That will be Terry to kick us off. I will talk about biomass, gasification to hydrogen, and then Jeff will talk about electrolysis technologies. In addition to that, as a group, we deal with other derivatives of hydrogen, such as green ammonia, methanol, and fuel cells. Also looking to place that into sustainable aviation fuels, either via e-fuels or renewable hydrogen for renewable oil refining. As I mentioned previously, we explore and examine electrolysis technologies, do due diligence on OEMs and their offerings, and also look at things like transportation. So without further ado, I will turn the floor over to Terry and let him give kind of his state of the state, if you will, on blue hydrogen. Terry.
Okay, thank you, Pete. You've probably heard a lot about hydrogen recently, and that's because of the development of clean hydrogen. And as we morph into the clean hydrogen economy sometime in the future, there's going to be a lot of these things you're going to be looking at. And the way these are called by colors is primarily to differentiate them, so it's easy for us to talk about one particular process without having to describe it in detail. And these have different carbon intensities. The most intense, of course, is things like made from coal at the bottom there, moving on up. And then the holy grail is green hydrogen made by electrolysis with renewable electricity from wind or solar or other. Blue hydrogen fits kind of in the middle of this. It's based on natural gas reforming plus carbon capture and storage. and it reduces the carbon intensity of natural gas reforming by about 50% or so, something like that. Okay, can we move on to the next one? Next slide, Pete, Ryan, someone. Okay, what's projected to happen in the future, in the near future, in the hydrogen economy? There's expected to be a lot of growth in both low carbon hydrogen and renewable. Low carbon includes things like methane reforming with carbon capture, the blue hydrogen, and a few other things. Renewables includes things like electrolysis with renewable electricity, kind of the holy grail kind of things. And what you see here, this was done a couple years ago by McKinsey, and what they showed was that the expectation is that it's going to grow very, very rapidly. They're going to add about 7.5 million tons per annum of hydrogen. This is clean hydrogen now, in addition to what's out there already. And you can see it's divided up between renewable and low carbon, with renewable being more. And the darker colors here are the planned ones where people have fairly concrete plans, and the lighter colors are announced, and who knows what's going to happen with those. But they're expecting a very rapid growth. And as you can see from the graph on the right there, that most of this is going to be in Europe and North America. Europe is going to focus more on the renewable hydrogen processes, where North America is going to focus apparently on more low carbon type processes such as blue hydrogen. Go on the next slide. Okay, blue hydrogen is established technology. People use steam reforming and carbon capture at a number of places. Steam reforming is basically just the reaction of methane with steam, water, to form ultimately CO2 and hydrogen after some manipulation. It's more than 100 years old, very well established, widely practiced, huge scales, scales down pretty well. There's almost no byproduct. There's a tiny bit of ash, and it's fed by a very mature gas distribution infrastructure. Natural gas is right there, everybody's home. Carbon capture and storage uses a chemical absorbent to extract out the CO2 from the gas, and it is also very well-established technology. Next slide. Okay, where does CO2 capture fit in to a steam reforming process or autothermal reforming? Basically, you've got natural gas that you treat, and then you pre-reform to get rid of the things that would cause coking, and then you run it through the reformer, and the reformer is heated by natural gas. And then you do a shift to get the CO converted to hydrogen, and then you can capture the CO2 somewhere in later in the process. On the top line there, you see where CO2 is being captured coming out of the shift reactor. And as is shown on the right in the little table, you can get about half of the CO2 out this way, half of the CO2 that's produced. Obviously, you don't take the CO2 that's in the flue gas. But this costs you a penalty of about 18% on your capital. In the second line, it shows where you take the CO2 out after you've done the pressure swing absorption, separating out the pure hydrogen. This also allows you to get out about half of the CO2 that's produced, but it has a higher cost penalty, 32% of your capital. And then the last line there, it shows a way to capture the CO2 from the flue gas if you have some recycle loops in there so that all of the byproducts get burnt with the flue gas. And now you can capture 90% of the CO2, but your cost penalty is even higher, 79% of your capital increases. So let's look at the next slide. Yes, this is the scale up. What about scale up? Steam reforming and autothermal reforming compared to other processes. Steam reforming, the blue line there in that graph on the right. This is work from about 10 years ago, but it's generally the same. It scales via volume, and so it scales quite well. And you can go to quite high scales, and it goes, at that curve. With gasification, coal or biomass, they're a little bit tougher to scale, and the scaling factor is a little bit worse. Electrolysis is quite different in that it is not a scale up so much as a number up. That is, you don't increase the size of any one cell, you have to add more and more cells. And so it scales more linearly with size. And The shape of these curves will stay roughly the same, although the height of the curve or the absolute values will change, especially for electrolysis as more research is done and the costs come down. And especially at the smaller scale, electrolysis is still pretty competitive. What about the carbon capture? Go to the next slide. Here we go. Can carbon capture scale enough for blue hydrogen? Well, there's a Carbon Capture Institute. You'd be maybe surprised to know, but they have some documents they put out about the total capacity of carbon capture in the world, and that's in that first top table there. There's about 41 plants around the world. They scrub out about 65 million tons of CO2 per year, which, if it were used for making hydrogen, would be about 22 million tons of hydrogen per year. The CO2 is primarily used for enhanced oil recovery, EOR. And most of that 65 is used for EOR, not all of it. But there's people have plans now for making more carbon capture plants, various places, and that's in the lower table there. And this was done about it's about a 3-year view, and what the expectation is that about 26 plants are planned to scrub out about 45 million tons of CO2 per year, which would produce about 15 million tons of hydrogen over the course. This is added over the course of 3 years. So the 1-year add is about 5 million tons per annum of hydrogen, potentially. And you remember those projections earlier were about 7.5. So if all this EOR comes about, and if it's all used for hydrogen, only about 2/3 of all the expected growth would be able to be supported. Can we look at the next slide, please? Okay, how does blue hydrogen compare to green hydrogen in terms of some costs? Blue hydrogen, as you can see there in that brown section, this was done by IEA a few years ago, and they looked at 2 different natural gas costs, which is the biggest cost in blue hydrogen. The lower one is at $3 per million BTU, and the upper line there, brown line, is $11 per million BTU. Electrolytic scales with electricity costs, okay, linearly. And so this is the curve they put together, and you can see that the break-even point where they come together is around about $50 per megawatt hour, or below. And that's the break-even point. Well, how does this compare to real-world electricity prices? If we go to the next slide. Well, you can see where that little curve, that little red box is from the previous slide. And you can see real-world electricity prices. This is from March of 2023. You can see that even in cheap electricity places, India, China, Russia, those are about $70 per megawatt hour. And 50 is roughly the break-even point or where they cross. And all these other countries, electricity is so much more expensive, at least in the near term. Blue hydrogen is going to win out economically. And we can see that if we look at the next slide, this is projection much further into the future that was done by McKinsey a couple years ago. And what they've done here is the light blue is blue hydrogen. That's the hydrogen with the steam reforming or autothermal reforming and carbon capture. And plotted on the x-axis is capacity. And the capacity, and they show some different places where that capacity would likely be. And you can see that the cost there that's on the y-axis for the blue hydrogen is going to be, they expect it to be lower than for all these other renewable hydrogen processes going in 2050. And I just drew a line there, that white line, to say, well, what would it take in terms of incentives to make them equivalent? And it would cost you about $11 trillion per year in incentives in order to level them out, all to be equal to blue hydrogen. So blue hydrogen is definitely going to be favored long into the future. And there are some actual projects that are underway. One of them is the Air Products Louisiana Blue Hydrogen Complex, where they use autothermal reforming of natural gas, not methane, not steam methane reforming, as I indicated, to make 750 million scuffs per day of blue hydrogen. They're going to capture 95% of the CO2, they claim. And this is going forward. They're starting to work on this. And there's a similar plant being built by Exxon that would make 1 billion scuffs per day of blue hydrogen. So this is actually becoming a reality, and it's the favored near-term solution for making low-carbon hydrogen. Pete, I'll leave it with you.
Great. Thanks for teeing me up, Terry. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the state of hydrogen from biomass gasification. To be clear, as JD mentioned in my intro, my background is in kind of commercial development, project development. And so I'm going to talk about this more from a commercialization perspective than specific technologies. We do have other experts who are kind of who work in the gasification, including Terry himself. Who've worked on this for decades, the gasification of biomass to different products. So I did crib one of Terry's charts here, just to kind of start out. So what color, again, is biomass gasification. It's a little bit of a strange animal. So in the chart to the left, that shows green hydrogen coming from biomass. On the right, another publication that I found refers to as turquoise. I've seen it listed as brown hydrogen, and I think that's really kind of more when you gasify it in addition with coal, which is maybe not a fairly common practice, but is a commercial practice, biomass for power with coal. So a number of different things here. So the color coding system doesn't work quite as neatly for biomass. But in the end of the day, we're talking about carbon intensity. That's really what it is. So, whether it's polka dot, striped, green, turquoise, whatever, the real world implication is that using biomass gasification, you get a lot lower carbon intensity. So up to 80% reduction from SMR, as Terry pointed out, the highest, or not the highest, but the most common form of hydrogen produced today, SMR. 99.5% of the world's hydrogen is produced via SMR. So biomass offers a particularly good savings on a carbon intensity basis from that. Important also with the announcement of the 45V credit here in the United States. Last week that was issued. It looks like biomass kind of in this range would qualify for the production credit, which is up to $3 per kilo. How much of that exactly, it's a carbon intensity is on a specific pathway basis. So, there are a lot of variables that are involved, including, the source of the biomass, how far it travels, et cetera, et cetera. So I won't get too hung up on that. But the big point is it qualifies for low carbon programs, both nationally and in places like the state of California. So what is biomass? Number of different things, including ag residue, purpose-grown crops, residue from sawmills and the like, recycled paper, and even municipal solid waste, MSW. Bottom line is it's all over. In the U.S. alone, there's an estimated billion dry short tons. This is the famous DOE report updated in 2023 called the Billion Ton Report, which details, the power, the abundance of biomass and then the costs on the left axis. So ranging from a number of of lower cost, but it's small volume, to higher cost, higher volume feedstock sources. So just an overview of the gasification process, a multi-step process. So, and this is kind of generalized. There are different ways this could go. Even, just to start with the biomass, depending on the source, if it's something like municipal solid waste, there's segregation, cleanup. So, you might not have a uniform source of biomass. So there's even, maybe some pre-separation or pre-cleanup that goes into that. Then the biomass is fed into a gasifier, typically 800, 900 C, so a high temperature process, which produces a syngas. And then there's a syngas cleanup step to remove different things, including alkali metals, particulates, sulfur. You want to have that nice clean stream in order to get to kind of fuel cell purity of hydrogen. It's got to be 90 to 93%. a water gas shift reaction then takes place to increase the hydrogen concentration, and then finally a separation from of the carbon dioxide into hydrogen. So where does biomass gasification stand? So this is a pretty old technology. So I found a paper that said back in London, 1807, so 200 something years ago, was the first instance of biomass being gasified for power. Obviously, biomass has been used for a lot longer than that in the form of wood, peat, etc., for burning, but gasification was used in 1807, and by 1830 in London, the gas light system was excuse me, gas lamps were populated throughout London using gasification from biomass in part. Today, this is just a snapshot of the U.S. of combined heat and power CHP plants in the U.S. So as you can see, there's more than a handful. So a very developed technology, and then this holds globally as well, that there are hundreds, thousands. So what's the problem, right? So if you have an abundant source of feedstock and you have a commercial gasification process, why isn't hydrogen? Why aren't we pumping out hydrogen all over the place? So as you'll see here, there are a number of challenges. I won't get into all the details on the far right, but in broad categories, there's biomass, as I mentioned before. There could be heterogeneous mixes of biomass. So there's the separation, cleanup. There's the expense of gathering biomass. So you talk about things like deadfall in forests. We have to send a crew up to basically drag that off the mountains and bring that to some place where you can process it. Those sorts of things. The technology, scalable. Most CHP plants are fairly small, so, and that's just the gasification part. When you're talking about the integrated production of hydrogen, those are basically pilot scale. We'll get into more of that later. And then the cleanup of the syngas itself. There are challenges with that, and there are high economics that also, high economic costs with syngas cleanup that are also associated, which have prevented commercialization. So where do we stand? According to the IEA, there's, as it says, no commercial production of hydrogen today. There are a number of kind of pilot plants or demonstration plants, and that's TRL 6-7 kind of going on today. But again, none of these are large scale. And as far as I understand, I think one of these, I think the RWE project is undergone final investment decision and is undergoing construction. The rest are kind of in the planning phases. So not a whole lot of commercial data out there. Okay, so when we talk about the economics, again, hard to say what it is, right? Since there are no commercial economics. But there are a couple good papers out there. One that I found that I think kind of most credible estimated the range of kind of $3.50 to $4 before low carbon incentives. So as I talked about earlier, these could qualify for IRA 45V credits, low carbon fuel standard credits in certain states. So there are some interest there, but the kind of production cost falls between what Terry was saying on the low end of blue hydrogen, around maybe $2 a kilo, up to kind of $6 or so. And Jeff will dial into that from electrolysis technology. So it's kind of maybe a middle step in between. Can I get the next slide, Ryan? Okay, so the LEC's outlook. Is hydrogen from biomass destined to be a middle child? So being a middle child myself, you always feel like the older one is mature and praised for acting, very comporting themselves well and doing all the things the right way. And the younger child, has all the potential and gets a lot of attention. In this case, commercially and from investors, tons of money, or more accurately, billions of dollars going into electrolysis, electrolyzer scale up, and so forth. So SMR, as I said, it's cheaper, right? It's commercial, it's proven technology. Electrolysis more expensive, but there's a lot of, again, R&D going to that. There's a lot of plants being built, capacity scaling, biomass gasification. Will it be able to compete? The first commercial plants, as I mentioned, the demo plants are going on, starting to be built now. First commercial plants, not likely before the end of the decade. So there's a bit of a question just how impactful biomass gasification will ever be. I think it does make sense in certain configurations. So if I talked about MSW a couple of times, but if you had an urban area where you collected it, so the logistics costs aren't high, and you could convert it near end customer, like say a port, something like that, that model might make sense. Other forms of biomass, particularly as I mentioned, forestry residue, the cost of aggregation, I think is pretty hard, and then you have the problem of delivering hydrogen to market. And then I think finally the viability of syngas cleanup remains a huge concern. I have read a couple things that indicated that the cost of syngas cleanup could drop by 50% by the end of the decade based on a couple of different technologies, but those are even lower TRL, maybe 3-4 compared to what's being used in the demo projects that I mentioned. So some promise, particularly with low carbon incentives, but I don't think that biomass gasification itself is a silver bullet. And that's I will turn it over to Jeff at this point. Thank you.
Get off mute here. Okay, thanks, Pete, very much. Let's just go to the first slide. So the first slide here comes from the IEA, and this is specific to electrolytic hydrogen. The European Union is very active in green and renewable hydrogen development with a focus on electrolytic, but looking at other pathways too. But I think they do a lot of work on electrolytic, and you can see if you just look at these numbers of what's projected in terms of the project pipeline, it's pretty astonishing. So if you look at the top left, we currently have like 5 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity on the books. But if you look on the right, in 2030, it's 500, so factor of 100. Even if there's demand, is that level of build out feasible just with the practicalities of construction labor availability and things like that? And that will remain to be seen. But growth of this general magnitude has been seen with wind and solar, so we'll see how that all pans out. Important to this ambition to meet this level of project build, we need to have manufacturing capacity. And on the bottom, you see also there's a very dramatic set of plans in place to expand global electrolyzer manufacturing capacity. And that's very, very critical, because when we talk about cost and comparative costs between different hydrogen pathways, building production capacity for electrolyzers is going to contribute at least 50% of the expected cost reduction anticipated for electrolyzers through learning rate and production automation. Next. So we at UCI kind of keep an evergreen projection of costs. My work with this began in 2018 with a study that we were asked to do by the California Energy Commission on the cost and market development for renewable hydrogen. So that didn't address blue hydrogen, but looked at biomass and electrolytic pathways for hydrogen production. So what you can see in this chart, the numbers may not match exactly with Terry and Pete, but directionally, electrolysis currently is quite a lot more expensive than the biopathways, and the carbon capture pathways project to be cheaper than either of them. So the ultimate deployment will depend in part on policy, because there's a lot in Europe and America, there's pushback on the use of carbon capture, but you can see that it can potentially be cheaper. Among these technologies, electrolysis is projected to show the steepest cost declines, and that's because of the current very, very low factory production scale and its anticipated growth to thousands of units a year being the main contributor. And then, of course, technology advancements will contribute as well. In the long term, the band of costs in the range of 7 or 8 up to about $16 or $17 per gigajoule is within the range of uncertainty of this type of forecasting. So one could expect that all these technology groups will have a role to play. Next. So specific to electrolytic hydrogen, the cost of producing hydrogen through this technology depends on two primary factors. One is the cost of electricity. And just as a rule of thumb, these devices consume about 50 kilowatt hours per kilogram of hydrogen produced. So the cents per kilowatt hour delivered cost of electricity divided by 2 is approximately equal to the energy component of your production cost, and then capital being the remainder. And that depends quite strongly on what your capacity factor is. And this is one reason why some of the provisions of the new tax credit regulation relating to use of energy, renewable energy credits becomes critical, because in high solar locations, if you can't use RECs, then you're limited to something in the range of 30% capacity factor. And you can see that at current capital costs of around $1,200 per kilowatt, that's a pretty big burden, and becomes less sensitive to this as technology costs comes down. In this early stage of the market, and I'd say the political justification for subsidizing this at a $3 per kilogram rate potentially is to allow the technology to actually scale and achieve the cost reductions that are targeted. Next. So how are we actually doing regarding progress on electrolyzer cost reduction? I generally do these things aggregating the different electrolyzer technologies with the perspective that the lowest cost, best fit will win. So this is a combination of PEM, alkaline, and so ultimately, as solid oxide comes into the market, we would plot that too. This is a forecast of cost reduction that was developed back in 2018, primarily based on learning curve, which basically says for every doubling of global production of a technology, there's a predictable amount of cost reduction. For fuel cells and electrolyzers, that rate has been pretty well validated at around 18%. And without getting into the complexities of the chart, it basically says high point to high point, low point to low point, and midpoint to midpoint based on actual data of bids and sources of actual project information. And it shows, well, we are arguably making some progress on cost, but toward the upper range of what was projected in 2018. Next. A lot of, some disappointment in why we're not achieving cost reductions more quickly is because of supply chain issues related to the pandemic and inflation. This is the chemical engineering cost index here, and you can see that between 2020 and currently it has spiked quite a bit. Next. So we did a projection in 2018 for the California market, and specific to renewable hydrogen, of the market shares of the technologies based on our expectation of cost evolution. And interestingly, it came out to be about 50-50 between biomass pathways and electrolytic. Both of them, as you saw in my earlier chart, can potentially get to something in the range of $2 to $3 per kilogram, or roughly in the range of $15 per gigajoule or million BTU. And because of that, and in the case of California, we have a significant biomass resource, so we projected it to be about equal. Next. So some outlook here. So there are some bright spots, and I would admit this is probably a little bit US centric. But when we look internationally, there are many hydrogen strategies announced continually. I saw something recently that said there's 60 of them, national and multinational strategies, that have a significant electrolytic hydrogen component. The US hydrogen hubs have been awarded. There are 7 of them, and by design, they represent a range of production pathways, including blue hydrogen, electrolytic hydrogen, and biomass-derived hydrogen. The factory expansion announcements have begun to kind of match expectation, which is positive. And global geopolitics, increasing the focus on energy security, make these sort of domestically produced energy sources have more value. The challenges that we see is that the 45V credit guidance, in my opinion, slants the field against electrolytic, because the so-called 3 pillars, which were softened a little bit in the final regulation, are still somewhat onerous for electrolytic hydrogen. The three pillars basically say the use of any renewable energy credit has to be simultaneous with the consumption, which says you can't do day-night shifting with them with solar, that the system has to receive electricity from newly built facilities, and that the electricity production and hydrogen production have to be in the same geographic area. And all of those restrictions tend to put up cost a little bit. In addition, transmission and distribution rates, as Terry was mentioning, we have energy prices below 5 cents a kilowatt hour, which is fine, but it costs you 15 cents to deliver that in California. So all of this is difficult. So beyond this, some of the large environmental organizations don't really support hydrogen. So there's this whole back and forth that goes on in every regulatory and legislative venue of, arguments pro and con, often diametrically opposed on what the global warming impacts of hydrogen leakage is, whether hydrogen's safe, et cetera. So I think what all this means is that electrolytic hydrogen will continue to have a robust outlook, but I personally think the Middle East, Europe, and Asia will see the more accelerated development, while the 45V tax credit final guidance effectively calls the bluff of industry. And I think I think it's going to really diminish the number of electrolytic projects that are built through the hubs. Okay, we'll skip these. These are just some things about, does hydrogen form more NOx? It's claimed that it does categorically. That's not necessarily true. And in most experiments that we conduct, it reduces hydrogen for reasons that we don't have time to go into. And same with global warming impacts. There's these indirect reactions that can create a global warming effect, but they're very small in comparison to the overall benefit of hydrogen as a renewable fuel.
Thank you, guys. That was a great chat. And Jeff, given that you're in the Irvine area, we hope you and your family are safe with the fires. Pete, I think you're a little farther north, so hopefully you're safe and sound. But our heart goes out to LA, obviously. So we do have a couple of questions that have come in, and I'll just read them for efficiency. So the first question asks about what does the hydrogen demand curve look like for the next 5 years? Is there a demand differentiation based on the color of the hydrogen?
Well, I'll start quickly here. The demand curve, at least as far as the IEA would be concerned, looks like that production growth curve that I showed. So it's a pretty dramatic acceleration. Depending on policy regimes, I think people should care more about carbon intensity than color, but they're fundamentally looking for a least cost solution to hit whatever carbon goal they have. So California has a lot of binding regulations regarding carbon intensity of fuels, and people are saying, okay, I'm going to comply with the regulation, or maybe I'm going to do it for environmental reasons, but I'm looking for the least cost hydrogen at a given carbon intensity.
Okay. Another question came from David Peterson. How much of the drawback or reluctance to use biomass for producing hydrogen is related to government definitions for the carbon neutrality of woody biomass?
Yeah, I'll take that. So, no, good question. I mean, I think the overall where the policymakers are trying to go is to use the GREET model, which is the measure of carbon intensity simplified, and that should take into account, the source of the biomass, whether it is carbon neutral or not. In some cases, biomass could be potentially, depending how broadly you define biomass, but could be, you could have negative carbon intensity. So I think people are getting more sophisticated kind of with this idea of measuring carbon intensity, again, moving away from the simple color schemes or sources saying that, this category is X category is good and Y category is bad, and understanding pathways. But it's not a simple argument. So I think, in particular, the 45V, recognizing, the biomass as a legitimate source for the credit will accelerate and hopefully address the use of increase the use of biomass.
Okay, great. And then the last question, there might be one more in the Q&A, but are any of the major oil and gas companies getting into the hydrogen business at scale? If so, would it be primarily blue hydrogen that they're looking to generate?
Okay, I actually covered this a little bit. Two that I know of are very large scale. One is Air Products, developing that one near New Orleans to make blue hydrogen. And the other one is ExxonMobil, developing one in Baytown, Texas, the other end kind of the Air Products hydrogen pipeline. So just in the US, there are two, and theirs are both blue hydrogen. Blue hydrogen is kind of the low-hanging fruit, as people mentioned, because the technologies are pretty well known, cost structure is pretty well known, and in a sense, it's an easy step compared to some of these other ones. So they're going to take more time.
Yeah, and Air Products has a major electrolytic project in Saudi Arabia, and I think we're going to see different solutions in different regions. They have great insulation there. They have special rates, et cetera. But the oil majors, especially ExxonMobil, as Terry mentions, are very interested and active in blue hydrogen if you look across all of the hydrogen hubs, at least in the US.
Yeah, and I would say it's a little bit different in the EU. You've seen more involvement. Companies like Total and BP have made more significant investments in green hydrogen production. So I think a lot of it is regional and regionally dependent also.
Okay. And I think looking at the time, this will be our last question. If we haven't gotten to your question, we will do our best to have the team respond to it via email after we wrap up. But this question comes from Mark Burke. There was no mention of microbial production of hydrogen from biomass, including microbial electrolysis cells, whereby higher value byproducts versus CO2 could be produced. Is that approach currently considered too expensive for inclusion in this analysis?
So just in terms of how we put this analysis, I think we selected probably the three most common ways of producing hydrogen currently. There are other pathways. I'm not really familiar with microbial production, would be interested to learn more. I do know there are things like, geological hydrogen that people are exploring, for example, which basically looks at, oil, kind of wells, that have been already extracted the oil and gas from, but produce hydrogen. So there's some different things out there, but none of them are at scale. So as these, technologies emerge and we learn more, I think, certainly at LEC, we consider looking at various sources, but I think for commercially speaking, the ones that we highlighted are probably, most close to commercial scale.
Okay. Well, guys, thank you so much for your time, for pulling all this information together. And I'm sure that I speak for all of you that if there are questions coming from the audience, they can certainly reach out to any and all of you for follow-ups. And if we do have clients who are looking for help on any and all projects, please feel free to reach out to any one of us directly. So with that, we are moving to the next phase of our monthly series. And this is where we get to introduce some new experts into our community. And I believe Dr. Mark Burke, who just asked that great question, is available. Mark, can you come on camera and unmute yourself?
I believe I am.
Excellent.
So thanks much for the intro, and it's great to join such an amazing group of individuals, and I look forward to contributing in the future. So just a little bit of my background I'll go through quickly here. I know we're running late on time. I had a PhD from Yale in organic chemistry, a postdoc at MIT with Barry Sharpless, who has won 2 Nobel Prizes. And that led me on to an early career at DuPont, as well as I was a professor at Duke University, where I worked on catalytic technologies, really aimed at the production of small molecules and pharmaceutical intermediates. That technology actually was licensed by a pharma company over in England. So I went to Cambridge to help commercialize that. Cambridge is lovely, by the way. And that was very successful. That technology is actually currently used for production of about 20 different pharmaceutical products. That was at a company called Chiroscience. And while I was there, I got exposed to biotechnology, and this was in the mid to late 90s. I got very excited about biotechnology, saw the interface of chemistry and biotechnology as a great place to be. So I took a deep dive, joining a company called Diversa Corporation here in San Diego in the year 2000. I've been immersed in biotechnology now for the last 25 years, as it turns out. That is all about synthetic biology, metagenomics. These are all terms that are taken for granted now, but they weren't terms back when we were developing the technology at Diversa. Environmental libraries and really developing enzyme products for use across wide industries, animal feed, oil and gas, biofuels, pulp and paper. These are all different applications of that technology. Quite successful. That was acquired, moved on to a company called Genomatica, where I was the chief technology officer for 12 years. Really established the product portfolio, established the platform, the IP portfolio, as well as the pipeline of products that are now pretty well established in terms of industrial chemicals. And Genomatica is doing extremely well. I had the ambition of spinning out a few companies, which I did. I was a founder, CEO of 2 different companies, but more recently, what I've done is really an increasing amount of consulting, and hence my interest in joining this group. I've been consulting in a range of different areas, all, as you can see, in my areas of expertise. In particular, I'm half-time consultant in a biofuels company, and I'm actually managing their IP portfolio. I have over 300 issued patents, over 140 US issued patents. I've written a lot of them. I know the whole prosecution process very well. And so that's something that is actually capturing the attention of numerous clients that I'm engaged in. And I actually should say, relevant to today's discussion, I'm engaged in quite a few discussions around hydrogen. And so my question around use of microbial production from biomass sources, one of those discussions is involved in an initiative in Africa, for example. That's relevant to today's discussion. So really happy to join this group, and like I said, very much look forward to helping out where I can on different projects.
Terrific. Thanks, Mark. And we'll get you and Pete connected so you can be on the next hydrogen, clean hydrogen presentation. And now we have Dr. Mohammed Farhan. Dr. Farhan, are you able to get to video or at least unmute?
Yes, I did. Can you hear me?
Yes, welcome.
Yes, actually, I don't know. Can you just see me? Actually, I just turn on my camera as well as the speaker.
All I see, go ahead. We aren't seeing video, but we'd love to hear about your background.
Okay, so basically, my name is Mohammed Farhan, and I'm basically right now residing in Canada, Toronto. So basically, I have like a diverse background. I did master's in chemistry, MPhil in molecular biology, PhD in lignocellulosic grain biotechnology from UFT, University of Toronto. And then I did my postdoctorate, which is the collaboration from Suncor Energy, and I did research at TMU, Toronto Metropolitan University. So over the 2 decades, I do have like a research experience in different academia, like in Canada or in I'm basically originally from Pakistan, but I did, like more than like 10 years from now, the different universities, TMU, University of Toronto, York University, with different projects. But my expertise then bark biorefinery, lignin valorization, biofuels, because my postdoc was mainly focused on the production of jet fuel. And this was mainly, like as a hybrid process for using the microbes, as well as, like a high pressure, high temperature reactor. So this research has been conducted for the first time because I get idea from one of the company in Australia, but the new thing or the new technology which I just bring in here. So this is, I just include like the microorganisms and how to make it more valorized and more greener approach for the production of jet fuel series hydrocarbons. So,
Terrific.
same thing, I do have experience in, like biomass, as well as, for my PhD was mainly focused on the, like using a lignin, which is the second most abundant biopolymer, and how to convert it into chemicals. And my postdoc is the same series and use like a lignin into a jet fuel series hydrocarbons. So I do have experience in different projects, biofuels, as well as, like different type of feedstock, agricultural residues, lignin, forestry residues. So I'm very much excited, and I see there are like a lot of people with a lot of experience, and hopefully I think this is a platform where I can learn a lot of things, as well as I am still trying, like I recently completed with one of my training, which is to be held in the Verschuren Center, just to develop for the pilot scale to industrial scale fermentation and downstream processing. So I do have experience mostly like academia, but I'm also willing to work in the industries in future. But meanwhile, like I also work with the stealth bioenergy and biotechnology, different research projects. So yeah, that's all about me.
Thank you, Dr. Farhan. Welcome aboard. We do have sustainable aviation fuel COE, so make sure to look them up because it might be applicable. And Dr. Vicendo De Rochis, are you
Yeah,
available
yeah,
to? There
yes,
you are.
yeah.
Welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you, first of all. Thank you very much to have selected me to join your group. I'm very excited. So my name is Vincenzo De Rochis. I'm originally from Italy, but basically I study all my career in Spain. I did biotechnology applied to plant, food, and industrial application. Back in 2010, there I started to work with fungal fermentation, especially for pharmaceutical production and environmental biotechnology. Then I won the Marie Curie grant for a PhD at the Humboldt University in Berlin, joined with the Copenhagen University in Denmark, where I work mostly in beneficial endophytic fungi that will help plants, especially tomato and potato, to grow better, plant growth promoting organisms. Then after that, I founded my own startup in cell-free protein synthesis, where I was one of the founder and the CEO, and also the developer of the technology, using fungal spores to do a cell-free protein synthesis. I don't know if you are familiar with it, but it's a kind of zombie soup where you put DNA and they start to produce proteins. The company was going well, but then we kind of faced some kind of challenges that we didn't have the practical tool to solve them, so we have to abandon it. So I was basically hired by our main competitors, that was Lenubio, that they were using actually plant cells in doing it, and I was the one in charge for all the pharma part for the production of monoclonal antibody. And after that, with this kind of double background in science and also business related, I was hired by the Senderlo Group from the headquarter, because they wanted for me two main things. One was to design, create, and train people for a molecular biology lab and precision fermentation and biomass fermentation group, where I did it, and we work basically in mostly in side stream valorization and alternative protein applied to food, feed, and aquafeed. And the other part, 50%, was to is just to do due diligence and techno-economical analysis for merger and acquisition department.
Excellent.
Okay,
Thank you so much. We should get you connected to Maya Benami. She runs a center of excellence in a number of those areas. I think you guys would get along well. So welcome to all our new experts. And now I'm going to turn it over to Terry, who is going to be presenting Darren with an all-star.
Okay, our all-star for this month is Dr. Darren Dugard. Darren has a 25 years of experience in thermochemical conversion of biomass, going back to his PhD from Iowa State. He's a licensed professional engineer. He has 15 U.S. patents, published 16 refereed publications. He's been a subject matter expert with LEC for almost 6 years now, specializing in techno-economic analysis of bioconversion processes, all the way from fermentation to gasification. And he delights our clients with in-depth economic analyses and everything from blue sky type stuff through to commercial scale-ups. He's a great team player, responds promptly and thoroughly to client requests for more information. And he regularly gets glowing reviews from clients and peers alike that he works with, and is very deserving of this recognition. And let me say that he really, really knows thermochemical processes. Just get the names of the companies he's worked with to tell you he's checked out the entire temperature scale from his work with Cool Planet to his Burning Oak Energy consultancy. So please join me in congratulating Darren on being chosen LEC All-Star of the Month.
Absolutely. And I've been on a couple of projects. Customers absolutely love Darren, and he goes above and beyond always. So it's we're pleased to have him. Darren, are you on to say a quick hello?
You bet. Thank you very much for all the kind words. It's been a pleasure working with LEC over the last 6 years. I'm always excited to learn outside my area on different projects, and LEC definitely provides that, as well as gain more in depth on the things I'm more familiar with in thermochemical processes. And yeah, it's been a pleasure. I definitely appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, you're an asset of high caliber to LEC, and we are looking forward to keeping you engaged. Although you get pulled away for lots of different stuff, but
Lots
that's okay.
going on.
We'll keep pulling you back like the old mob movies. So with that, thanks everyone for sticking with us. We ran a few minutes over, but just for everyone's edification, you can use your phone and go and look at the QR codes there to get signed up for our monthly email newsletter, either direct or via LinkedIn. We also have a YouTube channel where this webinar will be posted, and feel free to send that link out to folks who you think would benefit from learning more about hydrogen or any of our topics, and you'll see previous webinars there as well. So if you are still with us, thanks for staying. And with that, let's wrap up. Thank you, everybody.